Welcome back everyone to Formula 1 Transfer Talk, the show where we discuss some of the juiciest stories in the world of the Formula 1 driver transfer market. And this year so far we've been treated to some absolute crackers. Sebastian Vettel, of course, kicking off this silliest of seasons in 2020, announcing his departure from Ferrari at the end of the season. That triggered a cascade of several changes up and down the grid. Carlos Sainz taking his place at Ferrari for next season. Daniel Ricciardo moving to McLaren, and in his place at Renault, Fernando Alonso returning to Formula 1 in 2021. We are yet to see what's happening with Kimi Raikkonen, whether he stays or goes. We are yet to see the newly rebranded Aston Martin team, whether they're going to replace Sergio Perez or even Lance Stroll with Sebastian Vettel. But today, our focus is on a story that broke 12 months ago. Alexander Albon replacing Pierre Gasly at Red Bull Racing. A story that I think a lot of people were very surprised at 12 months ago. Cast your minds back, heading to the Belgian Grand Prix, Pierre Gasly had a difficult time in his first 6 months with the Red Bull team. He had struggled in the initial winter testing period, crashing the car twice in just that opening week. And over the first few Grand Prix, really failed to establish himself with those front six runners, out in Q1 in the first race of the season, and it wasn't until China, race 3, he finally got through to Q3, and 12 months before that, it was that exact car in the hands of Daniel Ricciardo that took victory. Well, heading to that summer break, Gasly was getting better, slowly getting the hang of that Red Bull, but still nowhere near on the level of Max Verstappen, and Red Bull decided a change was needed. Gasly demoted back to Toro Rosso, which has now become AlphaTauri. Alex Albon giving his chance in a top seat in Formula 1, despite the fact he was still in his rookie season. And for the most part, he impressed. A great performance in his first race for Red Bull at the Belgian Grand Prix last year. Started at the back, thanks to engine penalties. Max Verstappen crashed out on the opening lap, and an incredible drive through the field. Some of the best overtakes of the entire season last year from Albon in that one race in Spa gave him a 5th place finish on debut. The remaining 8 or so races that he competed in for Red Bull at the end of last year were okay. They were solid. He was still in his rookie year, and he was still learning the ropes, but you could clearly see developments were being made. Overtakes were still incredible, still so juicy, and qualifying was getting better and better, and so much so in Suzuka, he finally matched Max Verstappen in qualifying. They got exact same lap time in Q3. But it was clear Verstappen still had the edge. But from a Red Bull perspective, Albon was far more consistent than Gasly. Albon was always there or thereabouts in the top 6 if he had a clean weekend. But there still was that gap. If there was a quiet race, he was still comfortably off the 2 Mercedes, the 2 Ferraris and Max Verstappen. But from a Red Bull point of view, it was far more consistent than Pierre Gasly. And then Brazil came around. That first chance for a podium, contact with Lewis Hamilton. But I think that race proved that even though Albon had struggled during that Grand Prix, he was comfortably off that top 5 until those incredibly dramatic final 10 laps. It proved that unlike Gasly, Albon was able to put himself in the right position at the right time. But it just so happens, whilst this incredible story of Albon in his rookie year finally got a chance at the top and almost got his podium, whilst that was bubbling over and ultimately contact with Hamilton, Gasly, who had been demoted back to Toro Rosso on the quiet, was having an exceptional end to 2019. Since he moved back to Toro Rosso, comfortably outperforming Danny Kvyat, something that Alex Albon was just about doing, but not on a regular basis. Pierre Gasly easily having the measure of his teammate back at his former team, and Gasly was really building up that momentum in that midfield group, and was finishing so often as best of the rest, or in those lower end of the points, despite the fact he was away from Red Bull, away from a top team. He was still well and truly in the fight for top 6 overall at the end of the season. And despite the fact that Gasly had been demoted, during that Brazilian Grand Prix when all eyes were on the front, they were on Alex Albon to nick that podium, after that contact with Lewis Hamilton, it was Gasly who made the most of it. It was Gasly who kept his nose clean throughout the entire Grand Prix and earned his first podium, a second place, an incredible drive, another great drive in the final race of the season in Abu Dhabi, put him in front of Albon in the standings. Carlos Sainz did just beat them both to 6th place overall, but 7th for Gasly, 8th for Albon. The fight was well and truly on, and the question marks going into this year was whether Gasly was able to continue that progression and show to Red Bull that he does have the ability, he does have the pace, and the real question mark was Alex Albon. What would he be able to do with that winter testing period, more development, more learning of Formula One, a full season under his belt? How could he progress at the start of this year? And already, we're 6 races in, and people have the pitchforks out. They're ready for another switch. And we've done our history lesson now. I feel I can speak a bit more freely about this transfer, whether we should go back, whether it's best to keep things the same. And I still maintain, and I was very clear about this at the time, I feel the biggest issue with Red Bull last year was that they didn't give Gasly enough time. He wasn't performing. That is very, very clear. But there was progression from Gasly from that first race to that final race he had in Hungary. It was clear that Red Bull weren't going to be drivers' champions. It was clear they were going to have a monumental second half of the season to beat Ferrari. Nevertheless, Verstappen did finish 3rd overall. Ferrari still had a better package than Red Bull. So, making the change to bring up Albon, yes, you can certainly look at the argument that Albon did a better job. And yes, you can look at the argument that bringing in Albon gave them an opportunity to assess who was better out of Gasly and Albon. And I like that side of things. But surely it couldn't have done much harm giving Gasly to the end of the season. Anyway, fast forward 12 months. We're here in 2020 and we've got the exact same dilemma. Do we bring back Gasly? Do we get rid of Albon? And once again, I find myself thinking, let's just give Albon to the end of the season. He's had a difficult start to 2020, but I think you'd say he's had a difficult start if you just look at where he is in the driver's standings. He's currently in 5th place, behind Charles Leclerc, level on points with Lance Stroll, which isn't necessarily the greatest of achievements. His teammate, meanwhile, is in 2nd place, Lewis Hamilton's closest challenger. Max is on 95, Alex is on 40. So there's still quite a big gap between the two. And when you look at Alex's season from that point of view, when you look at his best result is a 4th place finish, no podiums yet in 2020. Norris has got a podium in the McLaren. Charles Leclerc has got 2 podiums in a very subpar Ferrari. But what I have pointed out to people this year in 2020 was think about that first race of the season. If there wasn't contact with Lewis Hamilton, I am very convinced Albon would have, we all know he would have at least had a podium, but I'm very convinced he could have gone on to win that race. And that 25 points in the bag takes him all the way up nicely into that 4th place slot and with a comfortable buffer over Charles Leclerc. And I think if he had got that win under his belt, then I think there would be no questions about whether he should be replaced by Gasly. However, he didn't get that win. And that pace we saw in that first race and in that second race where he was 4th place has kind of drifted away a little bit. And ever since then, he's got 2 5th place finishes in Hungary and the 70th anniversary Grand Prix and 2 8th place finishes at the British Grand Prix and last time out at the Spanish Grand Prix. And it's this dip in form which I think is why people are starting to slightly question whether this Red Bull decision is working out. On the flip side, Pierre Gasly, what an incredible start to the season he has had. His worst qualifying of the season was 12th in an AlphaTauri. That is quite a bit, I would say, off that midfield fight. It's in front of the back 3 teams, but I would certainly put them in that 7th place slot. He's doing a great job, easily beating teammate Danny Kvyat, and is starting to look like a driver that I think deserves a place away from Toro Rosso, away from AlphaTauri. He's not a driver that should be at a B team. He's a driver that should really be given an opportunity to prove himself. And yes, you could certainly say he was given that opportunity last year, but the 12 months he has had since his demotion has been exceptional. Where we saw Danny Kvyat when he was demoted from Toro Rosso in place of Verstappen, Kvyat crumbled and had to take a year out before coming back and then finally re-establishing himself. Gasly just bang, straight away, back in that AlphaTauri and it's absolutely smashing it. And so far, for me, is up there with Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc and Gasly. They're my four, I would say, that have been the drivers of the season. Lando Norris as well, I think, would probably be my top five. And when you think about that, you look at Red Bull and you think, well, you've got a real superstar in Max Verstappen. Surely someone like Gasly, who's performing so well in a B team, it's a no-brainer. And you just wonder that poor start to 2019 with Gasly at Red Bull, how much that is going to affect their decision to bring him back. And rightly so, it was such a difficult period. And the only thing looking from the outside in, I'm sure within the team there's several different stories and different viewpoints, but from an outside perspective, it appears that that pressure was just a little bit too much for Gasly. Whether that was because Verstappen, it was his first year leading the team and he asserted way more dominance than Ricciardo ever did. Maybe it was because Verstappen's, how he likes to set up a car differs dramatically to Pierre Gasly. But this is now two drivers in a row, Alex and Pierre, that have really struggled to match Max Verstappen. And whereas Ricciardo started ahead, slowly drifted behind Verstappen at the end of their time together, they were still relatively on par. For the most part, I would argue. So why is it that these young guns that are performing so well at AlphaTauri or Toro Rosso, why is it that they can't get on the level of Verstappen? We will never quite know. However, is this the right decision now to make a change? Certainly not. Do I think Gasly is in better form in 2020? Certainly. Alex seems to be slipping back a little bit, and I think he's one of those drivers that needs a big result to really push him on to the end of the season. And if he's finishing outside that top 6, I would say top 4, but if he's certainly outside that top 6 at the end of the season, I think a change is going to need to be made. There is no doubt that that Red Bull is the second best car, and it's comfortably that second best car. 5th place at the moment. He's got a DNF in that first race of the season. It's doable, but if he's outside that top 6 at the end of the year, if he doesn't pick up a podium, questions will be continued to ask. And if Gasly continues his performances this season, Gasly is only 2 points behind Sebastian Vettel, then I think they will look and say, look, we need to seriously think about Pierre here. We know what happened last year. We need to give him another chance. And that's why I was so critical at the time for Red Bull making that decision to change. Because if Alex didn't work out, he's still got time. But if he does eventually not work out, there's even more headaches. And then do we end up in this endless loop where we put Gasly back in? If he doesn't work, Albon's back in. And then vice versa, vice versa. It's just not helpful. It's not going to work. And Danny Kvyat, who I thought was the better choice 12 months ago, now we find ourselves in a situation where he's comfortably being beaten week in, week out by Pierre Gasly and looks like he's going to have to find him a seat very, very quickly elsewhere before the likes of Yuki Tsunoda, Yuri Vips, Jehan Daruvula in Formula 2 all take over and start pushing for that junior seat. So, right now, I understand transfer talk is usually very unscripted and can sometimes get a little bit ranty, but Red Bull find themselves in a situation where they're a little bit stuck. If they keep Alex Albon, their ambitions for a driver's title are safely in the hands of Max Verstappen. I think a lot of people would agree that Albon's not on the level of Max at the moment and would be a nice rear gunner if he can just catch up a little bit more, find a couple more tenths in qualifying, get over those bogeys of being out in Q2 occasionally. If he can find that consistency, 4th place, give Red Bull strategy options, there's no need to change it for Gasly. The risk they run by swapping the two drivers is that Gasly will come back to the team. He could potentially have those issues he had last season at Red Bull. He may once again crack under the pressure, and Red Bull then run the risk of Alex Albon going back to Toro Rosso, crumbling like Danny Kvyat did, and then they find themselves in a real conundrum, a real pickle. And that's when I think, well, that's the issue they're doing, really, with not giving drivers long enough opportunities, because in Gasly and Kvyat, they've got two drivers that were once at Red Bull, deemed not good enough, but are now hogging seats for their junior drivers. But it's one of those issues where if Max Verstappen suddenly leaves, they need a superstar driver. Then what are they going to do if their junior seats are filled up with drivers they don't deem good enough, and they've got a number 2 driver that's going to effectively take that number 1 position? So Red Bull really have found themselves in a dilemma, which all stems really from the decision to not take Carlos Sainz and to really rush through Pierre Gasly's progression and throw him in at the deep end really early on in his career, which they have now done with Pierre, they have done with Danny Kvyat, and if they were to demote Alex Albon, you could argue that as well, being in his rookie year, being promoted way too early. So I always find it very tricky to talk about Red Bull's young drivers because the programme just seems to be so confused in its philosophy. What is the logical step for them next? I think Gasly is good enough to be a top driver. I think he's certainly learned from his time at Red Bull. I think Albon also is good enough to be a top driver. And I think if Red Bull give him a little bit more time, take that pressure off, which realistically is there for any driver in Red Bull under the hands of Helmut Marko, and being a system that likes to promote youth, that likes to have favourites as well, that's not particularly a happy and light environment to go into. Of course there's going to be that element of pressure always on a driver's back, but we have seen Bottas is a great example of a driver that once he is told he's got that contract for the previous year, the pressure's off, the performances get better and better. And I think if Albon is given that security, a little bit like Gasly was promised last year before brutally chopped off the system, I think if Red Bull were just a little bit more warm towards their second drivers, it might just help them in that long term. And so let's get on to the verdict. What do I think Red Bull should do? I think I've laid the land quite nicely there. I think this is all going to come down to targets. If we get to the end of 2020, this crazy season, and Albon is not in the top 6, if he's not got a podium, and if he's way off the points of Max Verstappen, I think a change should be considered. There should be no decision until the end of the season. There's no point going down that rabbit hole of making a mid-season change and messing up everything like we discussed earlier. But if we get to the end of the year and Albon has really struggled, that progression that we saw at the end of the last year wasn't there, and if Gasly does finish on a heck of a lot of points, if there are juniors in Formula 2 pushing for AlphaTauri seats, I think there needs to be some kind of change, some kind of switch up from Red Bull. Gasly is a driver, I'm convinced, that can do great things. Again, I said it earlier, I really hope he can, if he's not going to go back to Red Bull, he gets an opportunity from a team like Renault, from a team potentially, I know it sounds crazy, like Williams with their new investment. Just a project that Pierre can be the star man. And I think give a driver like Gasly, whose reputation's been damaged a little bit, give him that little trickle of a redemption story, that star man, you are the driver we want to build our team around. And I think that's the environment he will really thrive on. But I hope Gasly gets that opportunity. He has proved this year he deserves it. Alex, there's still time, but Red Bull really just have to decide what they want from that second driver and just not be so brutal. Is that so hard to ask? Well, in the world of Formula 1, it probably is, but I think the thing I've taken away from these crazy 12 months of Formula 1 transfers, especially within that Red Bull family, is just have a bit of patience, guys. You've got some great drivers, some world-class drivers on your books. You almost let Albon go. You almost let him go to Nissan in Formula E. You got him back. He's been really solid in Formula 1. Just give him a bit of time. No change needed now. Gasly is a driver capable of being fantastic, but we'll have to wait and see at the end of the season. And I will leave that there. for this episode of Formula 1 Transfer Talk. A little bit longer, a little bit less scripted than I thought. I had notes, but I kind of went off into a bit of a rant. And just so you know, some of this has been edited down because it got a little too ranty. But hey, you're used to it by now. If you've been subscribed for a while, if you haven't and you've made it this far, subscribe button is down below. Of course, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Transfer Talk. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments section below. Gasly or Albon for next season at Red Bull? I'm leaning towards Gasly, but again, we're just going to have to wait and see how the rest of the season pans out. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed and hope to see you all in the next one.